Indecision isn't neutral, it compounds. And for leaders, every delayed, avoided, or misaligned choice builds what Laura Mercurio calls decision debt, quietly stalling progress and weakening execution. Welcome to the PhD with Women on IT, Hack the Future. My name is Jamil Navarrosa, and today's PhD Positivity Hack delivered will be by our guest, Laura Mercurio. Our topic for today is titled The Legacy of Leadership, Breaking Decision Debt and Building Pathways. Episode 213 starts here. Let me remind you, this is a grassroots community that focuses on women in IT, an inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, and female leaders who are supported by men as well. And I bring heart to that hustle because empathy is my module, and empathy is critical in breaking decision debt and building pathways. Before we start our discussion, I want to take a moment to shine a spotlight on some incredible achievements from our community. Congratulations to Maureen Josephine for being recognized among the top 50 most influential women in Kenya 2026 by AfriCapital Ventures. Wishing you even greater impact, expanded influence, and many more opportunities as you continue to grow into this well-earned recognition. Congratulations once again, Maureen. Now let's go back to our topic. This week on Positivity Hack Delivered, we welcome back our returning guest, Laura Mercurio, trusted advisor to senior leaders, founders, and operators as she unpacks how complexity clouds judgment, why execution breaks down, and what it really takes to move from hesitation to decisive action. With our 20 years of experience across global organizations like BlackRock, Laura brings not only deep expertise but also a meaningful connection to this community. Through her work as co-founder and chair of HerTechPath, she continued to build real pathways for women and girls in technology. She also shares her CDE framework, clarity, decision, execution, designed to cut through noise, surface what others miss, and help leaders commit with confidence. Known as the voice in the room that says what others won't, she offers sharp insight that patterns that keep teams stuck. Please join me giving a warm welcome to Laura. Thank you so much for joining us once again, Miss Laura. And to
Thank you.
start,
How are you?
where in the world are you today?
I'm actually in Australia, so it's evening for us here. But thank you so much for having me on again. I feel really privileged to be able to come back and be on, with women on in IT.
And it feels so right to have you in this space again. So, you've navigated some of the biggest boardrooms in the world from your time at BlackRock. What was one power move regarding decision making that you saw at the top that works just as well for a manager of a small team or solo founder?
Uh, that's a really good question. I think the most important thing when you're in boardrooms or in big teams or even just running, being a founder is being very transparent about what you're doing, transparent about decision making, having an open door policy, in making people feel comfortable to come in, have a discussion about things and make sort of decisions. I think one of the most important things that you can do as a leader is make sure that you're bringing everybody on the journey, keeping them informed at the right time, when things are happening so that there's no surprises when things are happening. And I think that was probably one of the key things I learned early in my career, that, transparency really builds trust with teams. Now, understandably, sometimes you can't share all the information, but at least if you can share as much as you can, and with the context around it. And also sometimes decisions don't always go the way that you want, as long as you can just explain how that is. But I think the utmost importance is that whole transparency around communication, decision making, and then also just making sure you're bringing everybody on the journey, from the most senior person to the most junior person that's involved in either your business or in your projects and what you're working on.
For those in our audience who are joining us for the first time or weren't here for your early episode, we have to start with your signature. What's exactly decision debt, and why is it the hidden cost that quietly slows down even the most talented tech teams?
So, decision debt is basically all the hidden accumulation of unresolved issues and decisions that don't get made from a leadership perspective, and they're quietly sort of undermined. And I've run a lot of merger and acquisitions, and I've run a lot of big programs. And normally, when decisions that aren't being made that keep accumulating, quietly sort of undermine execution, teams, and sort of movement and progress of work. A lot of the times we find that transformation, it doesn't stall because teams cannot deliver. It usually stalls because decisions can't be made quick enough, or within most organizations, it's because the execution work has started before there's been clarity, on the direction of travel. Now, when I say decision debt, I use debt as an acronym. And the things that I've noticed in what creates that debt is direction, D for direction, E for execution, B for behaviors, and T for timing. So with direction is, are we solving the right problem? Are we aligned as leaders? Are we moving in the right direction before fundamental sort of decisions are made? With execution is execution, working and delivering what we agreed to do, or is it really sort of sometimes hiding some of the strategic confusion? So what we see is if the direction is not clear and people are trying to execute, although activity is happening, its kind of underlying issue is that we're executing potentially not on the right thing. Behaviors, I think, the B in debt is a really big one, because sometimes it's never clear up front who decides when, and who decides how. So one of the key issues that I've seen, and what I try to help a lot of leaders sort of work through, is when no one owns a decision, then everybody owns the risk. And when you're running large-scale programs, that could have a fundamental knock-on effect. And then finally, the T is like, when decisions need to be made. So timing is super important, because it's always timing that it always will have a knock-on effect in regards to sort of large-scale program or regulatory decisions that need to be made, and all of this. So I use decision debt as a framework to kind of work through that. And the reason why sometimes decision debt is hard to pinpoint, because it's not like financial debt. Like financial debt, you can find that in an organization or in a business because you've got a spreadsheet. You can see it in the balance sheet, the profit and loss, the cash flow. There's always some kind of a spreadsheet you can pinpoint that. We talk a lot about technical debt, and that's always easy to find as well, because you know that you've got systems you haven't decommissioned, but there's still a cost because there isn't funding to run a project. So it's easy to pinpoint. But decision debt is always that hidden one where it has a knock-on effect. Projects get delayed, budgets blown out, delivery teams get burdened with a lot of it, because it's those decisions that keep fundamentally shifting and sort of not being clear and moving. And I'm always a strong believer that if a decision that is tabled at a meeting, if it leaves the room, it will never get made.
It's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking we're just being through. We've all been in that meeting where everyone agrees to wait for more data before deciding. How do we know when we've crossed the line from being careful to actually putting our team into that?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I think it's a trap that many sort of leaders fall into, and, especially in large projects where people think more data is going to help them make a decision, when actually it won't change the decision, and you already know what needs to be done and needs to be made. I think where leaders need to step up is sometimes you need to take an educated risk and sort of take those decisions, with the data that you got. Now, we live in a really fast-paced, moving world at the moment, so there is a lot of data that we are given. I think in that's where decision debt actually starts, is when people want more and more and more data. We've all been there, and when I speak to a lot of my colleagues around the world, whether they're program directors, project managers, we've always had the pain of having to cut a steerco pack or a steering committee pack 20 which ways to Sunday in a PowerPoint, and senior leaders wanting to see sort of PowerPoint presentations in different formats and stuff like that. It doesn't matter how much data you're given. Sometimes it doesn't change that decision. So I think it's being confident with what is the data that I've got at the moment? Do I have the right, am I informed enough with the right amount of data to make a decision? And maybe sometime down the track, you might need to change that decision, but that's okay, because sometimes having more data doesn't actually help you give clarity on that. So as long as the data points that you've got, and you've got a clear sort of problem, a clear solution to that problem and a recommendation, sometimes you just need to take that decision and then sort of move on. And if it needs to be revisited at a later date, once you've got more information and once you've got more knowledge of what's going on, that's okay. I think sometimes, pace over perfection and making a quick decision rather than and waiting for the perfect decision and then delaying things is probably the approach to better take.
You have this incredible ability to spot trouble before it starts. You talk about pattern literacy. What is one specific red flag behavior you see in tech teams that is a dead giveaway that they are about to hit a major execution wall?
So I think pattern literacy for me falls under sort of the behaviors in the debt sort of framework, and a lot of that is always where people are either afraid to make a decision. Some of the key points are things where like, oh, let's park that for now. So that's literally just avoiding trying to make a decision, or let's circle back on that next week, or let's like revisit that at a later date. A lot of the times with teams that I work, you can spot that hitting the wall at least 3 to 6 months, that sometimes if you don't make that decision today, it's going to have that knock-on effect. So I think as a leader, and when you're working with big scale programs, you start to notice what makes people tick and what sort of doesn't. And some of the kind of typical sort of things I see are the ones where it's like, let's park that, let's try to do that later, maybe we can sort of revisit that. In a sort of founder and startup scenario, where I've seen that a lot is where founders have grown an organization, so they've moved from founder-led to organization-led, but then continue to behave as a founder. So where we've seen that there's like governance structures put in place, everyone's agreed to kind of move to that, but still have that innate sort of ability to kind of still want to work in sort of small environments. So both in large scale and small scale organizations, I've seen that. Early on in my career when, we were a small organization with BlackRock and then growing bigger and bigger. We were growing at pace. We were putting in the large scale, frameworks, and then people automatically sort of going back to sort of doing that found one. I can make this decision outside of governance, or I can make this decision in a meeting because of, I've done that before. So it's really trying to spot those reoccurring patterns. And normally I think the key is where, especially in tech teams, so back to your thing of tech teams, is one of the things I don't see a lot of tech teams doing is they're great at project planning. They're great at doing their dev plans. They're great at doing all of these other plans. One plan they never do is a decision matrix, as to when key decisions need to be made in order for the project or the program or the software development to keep moving forward. And that's probably one of the things that I try sort of educate my teams and educate some of the C-suite, that it's really important, just as important as you're going along, the journey of like a normal project or, a normal strategic plan, to also make sure that you've planned when those key decision points need to be made.
Sometimes the sheer volume of problems can feel overwhelming. When the pressure is on and things get complicated, what is your personal strategy for problem solving? Do you have any specific mental checklist you run through to keep your head clear?
Yeah, I think the most important one, I think, is sometimes take a deep breath, is probably the first one, because trying to make a decision amongst chaos is never the right thing to do. So I think it's always like, depending on how fast, I've worked in some really fast-paced environments where you had to make decisions really quickly and know what you need to do. And a lot of it goes back to take a step back, try to look at the big picture. look at what problem are we trying to solve? Do we have the right solution in place? And I think more importantly is what recommendation are we making? So I think why that is so important is if you don't make a recommendation, then that's where decision always starts, because it's quite easy to put down lots of options, but you need to narrow down those options to kind of, make sure that you actually sort of put that through. So I think the worst thing you can do is, react at speed to the chaos. Sometimes it might take that kind of step back, reframe what the problem is, reframe sort of what are some of the solutions that come, and make a recommendation with a tight sort of, deadline in doing that. So that's where I go into very, what am I trying to solve? When am I trying to solve it by? What are my options? And then out of all the options, what is the best outcome?
Talk about burnout, but sometimes it's just the weight of making too many choices. When everything is moving fast and nothing is certain, what is your go-to mental check to make sure you're making a high quality decision rather than just a fast one?
Yeah, that's and for me, I'm the type of person that has always worked in environments that we move at pace. It's always constantly moving at pace, but moving at pace doesn't mean you need to be reckless with decisions or things like that. I think it sort of goes back to the discussion that we were having earlier, where it's really important to look at. Do I have the critical points to make a decision? Do I have enough to kind of move that decision? Sometimes it's also what I call my spidey senses, or, gut feel, is with the information I've got, can we make a good decision on this? Because a good decision quickly sometimes, beats making the perfect decision that's late and has a knock-on effect and impact sort of further down the track. So I think it's also, having the confidence that with the information that you've got, and you've spoken to the right people, you've brought the right stakeholders around the table, you've made sure that you haven't put the business at risk or people at risk or anything at risk. And is that enough for you to make that decision and sort of move forward? And then kind of just own it and stick with it. If later down the track, maybe you find that you have to pivot or revisit that decision, that's okay as well. And just acknowledging that that's okay, because, you can only make decisions based on the information that you've got at hand.
He's been someone who values radical honesty. You're known as the person who says what others won't. For those of us who aren't at the C-suite level yet, how do we speak up about the elephant in the room without being labeled as difficult?
Okay, that's a really good question, because a lot of the times females are the ones that are labeled difficult, and I have in my career been labeled difficult because I'm always the one that sort of, called out the obvious or called out the elephant of the room or called out when decisions won't be made. Early on in my career, that was quite difficult because I would be labeled difficult. That's actually one of my biggest strengths now, where that's why I work with a lot of trusted C-suite CEOs, because I am the one that's going to call out the obvious thing that's happening. I think what's happening when, there's that sort of, elephant in the room is really starting to sort of, frame what's happening. So I think if you're afraid to call out the big elephant in the room, maybe, break it down into like little chunk sizes. And I think framing is everything. So if people don't want to call out the big problem in the obvious, it's kind of go, okay, what is the context? How do we frame it? How do we explain what's happening? How do we recommend or make a solution to it? But I think more importantly is, rather than constantly talk about the problem and the solution, is talk about the really highlight the impact of not making a decision, the impact of standing still, the cost of standing still, and what that is going to have on either the organization or your business, or, in your life. And I think more importantly is, if it's a big elephant in the room, maybe chunk it up in little bites. So if you can work out that there is a systematic way to make all of those decisions to deal with the entirety of the problem, then little bite-sized chunks, even though you don't particularly want to eat an elephant, but you know what I mean, little bite-sized chunks of, making the big problem a little bit smaller. And then, as I was saying before, just take everyone on that journey of what you're trying to do so that the problem doesn't feel as big and overwhelming as what it actually is if you're trying to tackle it all in one hit.
There's always talk about diversity, but progress can feel slow. Your work focuses on building pathways. Do you think the tech industry spends too much time trying to fix women and not enough time fixing the actual structures that stop them from advancing?
Oh, that's a really good question, Joanna. And I think my blunt opinion on this is women are not broken, full stop. We do not need fixing, full stop. There are good, talented women that have been there since the beginning of time. Like if you look back in history of the women that actually are involved in starting technology, like Ada Lovelace started the computer system, where a woman invented the windscreen wiper. If you look back in history, lots of women were there leading the way in tech. I absolutely do think it's a systemic issue that needs to be fixed. And it goes way beyond, trying to fix it once women are already in technology. As you mentioned, I chair an organization called HerTechPath. And the reason I'm so passionate about, being involved in that is you've got to fix the systemic issues at the root cause, and that goes all the way back to education. So what we do in HerTechPath is we bring industry and schools together so that girls can actually, have those role models of that are in technology today. So they can start thinking about the careers that they want to take in STEM and thinking about the pathway that they can have. And I think education really does need to be shaken up to make sure that there's all different pathways, for girls and women to be sort of in the STEM field. A little bit of a controversial probably take on this as well. Like I think also males need to be allies. It's no option. It's not an option. They have to be allies. They have to be, at the seat of the table. They need to be able to help sort of, fix the sort of, gender gap that we've got in, in the system. A little bit of a probably controversial a little bit. I think we tried to fix the system with DEI and all the stuff that we did with DEI, but I think that was more of a band-aid solution and has slightly worked against sort of some women because, the narrative and the perception is some women only got the job or a seat at the table because they were female as opposed to they're very good on merit. So I think once we started putting quotas in and needing to fill quotas, that actually probably caused a different systemic issue to actually just being able to sort of, change the narrative and really, get things. But I absolutely agree that it is not that women need change. We don't need any more mentoring. We just need to be able to make sure that there's a seat at the table. And I think given nowadays with technology, people being able to be entrepreneurs from just having a laptop, and the generation that is brought up in technology, I think we're going to see that changing quite rapidly and quite quickly.
Working with so many women through her tech path, you see the internal hurdles they face. What is the one piece of career that may be a habit or a way we talk about ourselves that you see women carrying that we need to drop immediately?
Okay. I think one of the things is probably women need to understand that collaboration is better than competition. I think I still see in a lot of the stuff I do where women feel like there's not enough space for more women at the table. I have seen before where once certain women get to the table, they want to stay at the table but block other people, at the table as well. So I think collaboration is key. I think that understanding that, and this is where it goes back to breaking that systemic issue, there's enough to kind of go around. There's enough work to go around. There's enough collaboration to go around. Two heads are better than one. And I think the more we collaborate, the better it's going to be. Because at the end of the day, everybody's different and everyone's an individual. So you might actually have the same job, the same skills, and have followed exactly the same career path as somebody else, but you always bring different things to the table from an EQ perspective, from a personality perspective, from different thinking and all of that. And that's why I think collaboration is super clear. and is one of the key things I think needs to happen sort of over sort of competition. And I think also just, just being confident in what you do.
We focus so much on technical skills, but the human side is what usually drives leadership. In your opinion, Laura, what are the top three soft skills that every career driven woman in tech should have in her toolkit right now?
Well, I think right now is confidence, because there is a sort of a lot of a noise out there, and at what level can you play in technology? So it's being confident in who you are, being confident in the knowledge that you've got, and what you kind of bring to the table. I think the second one would be authenticity, and I think why that is so super important is. I don't think I see it. I think it's probably more in my generation where you had to turn up and be work Laura and then play Laura. And then there was this confusion between the two as to because I was a very different person. And now I just turn up and be me because I am just one individual. That's what makes me, my personality, who I am at work, who I am in different ways. I think that what makes the younger generation, and I know we tend to pick on Gen Z a lot, but at least with them, what you see is what you get. So I think always turn up and be your authentic self. If something doesn't sit right, call it out. If something doesn't feel right, but just sort of be you, be unapologetically you. So all of you, the 100% that you are, and not trying to sort of bend to that. And then I think the final one, so I think it would have to be courageous communication. We live in a very noisy world at the moment, and sometimes the best ideas are from the people that are either a little bit quiet or don't have that kind of courage to kind of communicate. So be the voice in the room. The reason you're in the room is because people value you, they value what you do, who you are, and what you bring. So just be that sort of courageous voice, communicate the best that you can. So yeah, I think it's confidence, authenticity, and courageous communication.
Many of our listeners are looking for that next big spark. What's your best piece of advice for women looking to level up their careers or even take that leap into starting their own entrepreneurial journey?
I think you need to just do it. There's never going to be a good time. So it's almost like the stop waiting to feel ready, because every step you take, whether it's going to be an entrepreneur or taking that next level C-suite, everything's always going to be a learning journey. Things are always going to be new. So, sort of stop waiting, take a leap of faith, and have the confidence to do that. Now, I would caveat that with entrepreneurship, because I've seen some bad advice in the past where people go, oh, if you believe in your product and you believe in your, what you're doing in your business, leave your day job and jump full step into it. That's a very dangerous thing to do. I've helped a lot of entrepreneurs that, it was difficult for them to do. They took that, they thought it, they had no funding, they couldn't look after their teams, they then couldn't look after their families, et cetera, et cetera. So I think definitely take the leap, have a plan, make sure that you can, look at that 3 to 6 month plan of what you can and can't do. But yeah, really importantly is, just give it a go. And if you go from corporate to entrepreneur, it doesn't work, that's okay. You can always go back to corporate, but you're never going to know unless you give it a go. So stop waiting for the perfect time and just see where you go. Just always remember it's always on a learning journey as well. The other thing is if you are going to take that leap of faith and you are sort of a little bit unsure where you level up or build yourself a tribe, make sure you've got the right people that have done it before and lean into them, lean into your network, lean into the people that you've worked in to get advice, to seek advice, to help them along the way, and really be your support network, because it doesn't need to be a lonely experience. I'm working with a group of women at the moment where, we've got a WhatsApp group going. We've all got individual businesses. We're all trying to do what we need to do, but just having that support network to kind of go, hey, having this issue with this, hey, just posted this on LinkedIn. Can you guys see what you think? It really kind of, sort of helps. So I think as you're leveling up, stop waiting to feel ready. Get yourself a good network and tribe, and yeah, just give it a go. Oh, I can't hear you.
Vulnerability is a huge part of modern leadership, but it's a hard to admit a mistake. When we make a bad call that derails a project, how do we rebuild our credibility with our team without sounding like we're making excuses?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think it also relates back to a couple of things I said before. I think when you're in a scenario, if there's a bad decision that's been made and the project's been derailed, I think you need to quickly own it. You need to quickly sort it out, and you need to make no excuses. So if something's happened, own it, look at how can we solve this problem quickly. So I think it's that transparency and accountability that I was talking about before. To me, transparency and accountability is not a weakness, it's actually a strength, and is the foundation for sort of every high performing team and program to do that. So I think the quicker you own it, the quicker you explain to people why things have happened, the quicker that you go, okay, do you know what, we know what we know now. How can we move this forward? What needs to change? Where do we need to go? And then sort of move on. Take it as a lesson learned. Make sure you've got that on sort of the dial, and you don't need to sort of like repeat that at anything. But I think for me, the most important thing as a leader, and one of my most favorite quotes, is be the leader at the front when the team gets blamed, and be the leader at the back when the credit is there to be given. To me, that makes a really good leader. And where in my career I've had the best leaders are the ones that kind of almost took the bullet when things didn't go to plan, rather than sort of blaming. So yeah, that has to be my favorite quote, and I live by that at the moment. When I'm leading teams and that, I'm always at the front when things go wrong, and then I take a back seat and let them take the credit when things go right, because I think that's what makes a really good leader.
We can talk about legacy without mentioning the heart of this community. Your personal connection to Beata is so special, and you were one of her very early guests. Looking at where women on IT is today, what do you think is the most important building block we need to keep her legacy growing for the next 10 years?
I do miss her, and I am glad to be back. I think the legacy that she's left is that she's built something rare. She's built like a global community that she believed that, women deserve to build the table, not just be at the table. We don't deserve just to sit at the table. We actually want to build it. I think, she brings, what we need to do to continue to do what Berta does, was bring the voices that challenge, where women are in IT, bring the allies that, support and amplify, whether it's male allies like Patrick and, some of the people that have come on board, just all the allies, and then, amplify every sort of woman at every stage. So not just ones that made it. Like, one of the things she really did well is gave everyone the opportunity to kind of be here, be on the podcast, be, part of it. And I think, if I was to sum it up, with the way that she is like, keep it human, keep it global, and keep it real.
Behind every strong leader is a story of someone who opened the door. None of us achieve success alone. Is there a particular person who you are special or grateful towards who helped to get where you are today? And we'd love to hear a story about that.
Yeah, I think I've had a lot of people to, help me along the way. And I think what's really important is to really build your tribe. So there's going to be, there's a saying that, people come into your life for a reason and a season, and do that. So I think it's really important to sort of build your tribe. If I had to narrow it down to one person though, where I first learnt what makes a good, strong, female leader with tenacity and just kept things going, would probably have to be my mum. If I look at where she was, she was a mum and a housewife for like 20 years, and then had to jump straight back into, working, raising 4 girls. I've got 3 sisters as well. So we are a formidable group of females just within our household that, a lot of people say don't mess with the Mercurios, and I think people know why. But I think it's, early on looking at that leadership quality in someone close to me, and my mum, my sisters will always form my tribe, but I've had a lot of people that form my tribe in sort of work I've done from, my first boss that gave me the opportunity to go and live and work in Switzerland just by having met, and still I'm, a good in contact with him sort of 25, 30 years later. So I think it depends on where you are in life. And that's why I think it's really important, especially if you're on an entrepreneurial journey, is to make sure that you've got a tribe of people, behind you that can give you the support, the encouragement, that are, cheering you on when you're not in the room, and just lots of things like that.
You're always looking at what's next on the horizon. You're always moving forward. Are you working on any exciting new projects right now that the community should keep on the radar?
Well, yeah, as I always have lots of projects, you're right. I think the most important one I'm working on at the moment is with HerTechPath. We're taking that nationally in Australia. So it started off in one region and now we're taking it to all the other states. And that's really building the community around Australia, building the impact around Australia, making sure that we have a more significant impact for young girls, to encourage them to take a career in STEM. So that's probably one of the most important ones at the moment. I'm still doing a lot of work with entrepreneurs, and especially now I've sort of flipped the model. When I was living in the UK, I used to help Aussie companies set up in the UK. I'm kind of still doing that, but in Australia, and reaching out to sort of my network on there. So I'm sort of mentoring and, working with some founders that are looking to do market entry into the UK. And then there's a few others in the pipeline that, kind of early stages at the moment, that we're shaping as well.
Since you've been part of this community, Laura, since the early days, what is one small thing we can do this week to create a pathway for another woman in our network to step into her own leadership?
I think what's really important is to find one woman in the network that's probably a little quieter than the rest of us, but doing a lot, and really amplify her. Share her ideas, share her work, recommend her. I think, that's the way Beata set up set up this community, that, that's how she did it, one person at a time. So I think if we can elevate one person at a time and help someone that's probably not as confident or not as sort of outspoken, or is doing something really interesting, but they're not sure that other people would find it interesting, then I think that's kind of the way that we should do it. Because as we see the way that this community has grown, that one person at a time, and the amplify effect that it's had, and the sort of knock-on effect, and sort of almost multi-region, multi-effect that we've had, I think that's kind of the way that we need to kind of look through that.
And Miss Laura, as we are going towards the end of our show, let me ask you this. Hindsight is always 2020, especially when it comes to the books that shape our thinking. What is the number one book you can sit and think, oh, I wish I read before I started my career?
Oh, I think where I lean in on that one is probably a lot of the books that Simon Sinek has written. Not necessarily, I did read Start With Your Why. I think that sticks with me as well. But I think the book that really resonated was The Infinite Game. So throughout my career, I was playing a finite game. I always thought there had to be an ending. I always thought there had to be, I was even going through my career where I'd start a project and I thought that, everyone's going to recognize my hard work and everyone's going to know what I'm doing and I'm going to get rewarded and I'm going to get promoted. And then when that didn't happen, I was like, hang on a minute, how this isn't fair. I made it to the finish line, so to speak, and didn't make it. So when I read that book, I thought, actually, this is where I want to play the game different and I want to keep playing the game. And that's where I think leaders will always win, is how do they know where can I win and where can I keep playing the game? And I think in being, in the entrepreneur world, that's where you see it a lot, where it's like, where is my next move? How can I play the different game? Because it isn't an end to it. And then I also resonated with me because when I started to look at my career and I thought, gosh, I've really become a non-finisher. I go in, I clean up a mess, I start fixing projects, I start getting the teams working, high performing, and then I never see the project finished. And I thought, actually, that was a real problem to begin with. But actually, that is my greatest strength. And that's what I do with a lot of organizations. I go in when it's messy. I help them get structured. I help them get organized. I build the high performing team, and then I help them move on. So I think the infinite game is a really good one. That, you know what, the only finite thing we have in life, I think, comes out of his book, is that, you know, we're born and we're going to die. How we play life is an infinite different ways of being able to do that. And that's the way I see things nowadays. Like every time something happens, I'm like, okay, if this door shut on me, what's the next door that's opening? Okay, this happened for a reason, or let's pivot, or let's take a different path. So that's one. And I was lucky to actually, when he launched that book in London, I was actually at the launch and was able to sort of firsthand be in the audience and hear all about it. And I was just like, wow, I wish I had this book when I first started my career.
That's a very good recommendation. Let's imagine that you could meet anyone in the world for a private breakfast. Who would it be and where would you choose to meet?
I think at the moment it'd have to be Stephen Bartlett. I've been listening to his podcast a lot. I'm sort of listening to his audio book at the moment. And what I love is that he just brings a lot of guests onto his podcast from, you know, different backgrounds, different areas, different schools of thinking. And what I like about the podcast and everything, and why I'd like to have breakfast and sit with him is, you know, it's really that different school of thought. I think we live in a world at the moment where we're very polarized. So you either have to be, you know, on one side of an argument or the other, and you can't sway anyone in between. And, you know, when I'm always kind of at the point where if anyone makes a good argument, you could probably sway it. So I think it would be great to have breakfast with him, you know, and just kind of get sort of a bit of an understanding. And also just because of his entrepreneurial journey as well. He's had the highs, the lows, the stops, the starts. You know, he's failed, he's come back, he's building other businesses as well. So just to sort of tap into it. And he seems like a lot of fun. Like when you see him just, you know, finding someone in the gym and saying, hey, I'm going to make you commit to being 1 year and doing this, and you're going to follow it. So if I had to choose a place, I don't know why at the moment I feel like New York, because I used to go to New York quite a lot and I just haven't been there for a very long time. So at the moment I'm trying to think maybe New York would be, and they have some good breakfast places too. So you can't beat their breakfast burritos over there.
Yes. And we all have those short phrases or mantras that get us through the tough days. So, Laura, can you please give us your favorite life lesson quote?
I think my favorite, I always have a couple. Some are funny, some people won't get. But I think at the moment, the most important, you know, one of them is like, yes, you're never everyone's cup of tea, because sometimes you're champagne and you're in a league of your own, which is good. And that's always my funny quote, because especially having lived in Britain for so long, everyone's like, very in the tea, and I'm like, I'm not a cup of tea type person, I'm more of a champagne. But I think the one that really resonates for me, and I think if there's one that, you know, people should sort of take away is don't compare, and especially if you're on that entrepreneurial journey, don't compare your life to others. You know, there's no comparison between the sun and the moon, and they both shine, just not at the same time. And I think that's so important to do, because to remember, because both the sun and the moon have really important roles in the world. They shine at different times. They have different purposes. They can never compare each other to that. So I think for me, that would be the one takeaway, especially for people that are looking to like level up, like you said before, or looking to sort of take a new journey or entrepreneurial. And it's very important because even today, it's too easy to compare yourself because of everything that's going on social media. So, and everyone, you know, if thinking they need to kind of keep up with what's sort of happening. So I think that's the quote I always remember. You know, there's no comparison between the sun and the moon. And they both shine.
And that's it from 213 of the PhD live stream. Thank you to our guest, Laura Mercurio. And to stay updated and ensure you never miss a positivity hack delivered, follow Women on IT and turn on notifications to be alerted once the video has been released. And thank you to our fabulous team, Desiree, Kim, and Natalie. As always, our positivity quote comes from positive thinking only and goes look something positive in each day. Even if some days you have to look a little harder. Today is your day to hack the future, hack the positivity you want. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Miss Laura.
Thank you.